unknown.
This is a film about vice and versa.
And nothing could stop it.
Welcome to the Sixth Dimension podcast, where we review cult movies, horror movies, movies that you've never heard of. Each episode I have a guest on, and they review a movie that I've never seen, and then I review a movie that they've never seen. How you doing, Nathan? Nathan Hill? How are you?
Good evening.
Yeah, it's a good evening, isn't it? So just before we get started, Halloween was pretty recent, I guess. I didn't really do a special edition on any Halloween thing. We just talked about Halloween stuff basically around the time that the podcasts were released. But did you do anything for Halloween?
Buddy, I just rewatched the latest Halloween, which I thought was kind of cool. Okay. I really dug it, and the acting was excellent. Jamie Lee Curtis, I thought they smashed it out of the ballpark. I really enjoyed it.
I didn't think it was that great. I preferred H2O as a comeback. I thought H2O worked a lot better. Too. So I'm
excited to cut you off, but I've been kind of going back over them all and trying to sort of figure out, which one was better than the other.
Oh, okay, yeah. I don't think either are good. I just like H2O a bit better, maybe for sentimental reasons, but it just seems to work better. And
it might be your age group, though. Could be your generation.
Yeah, well, I think I saw when I did see Halloween, this new remake. It was 20 years ago that I saw the Halloween H2O with my dad. And
cool.
Yeah, it was a really good memory, And I was in the cinema with a couple of friends for this remake. And there was a guy with his kid who looked about 8 years old, and I was 8 years old at the time when I saw H2O. I thought, it's the cycle is complete. It's perpetual.
A new hope.
Yeah, exactly.
Man. I mean, it's funny. I had a favorite horror book when I was a bit younger. Well, actually, I was quite young. And on the cover, I didn't realize till years later was the cover of Halloween because it just said horror movies and it has the hand with the knife.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I must have stared at it, sitting on my bookshelf for, a year. And then I finally realized, that's Halloween because I was too young to figure it, to really understand it. And I wasn't really into slasher films when I was younger. I was into like classic horror and old school stuff. We're talking black and white. I was probably still going through the whole sort of genre chronologically.
Yeah.
Because that's an interesting point to make because when I realized I liked horror, I literally started with silent film.
Okay, why is that?
I wanted to sort of, from a historian kind of point of view, I guess, I wanted to see how the entire genre had evolved. And when I really liked someone, because the first image I think I ever saw that scared me would have been Nosferatu. And I was like, oh, my God, what is that?
Yeah, that's a genuinely frightening image, though.
Very frightening. And I reckon I was 4 or 5, and I just was intrigued by that image of the vampire. And then that made me watch all the films in that era, and then I just kind of naturally progressed from there. But back when I was a kid, horror movies and black and white films were quite common. They were on TV. They would start at about sort of 10 p.m. and they would be on quite regularly. And so, you would have a chance to watch them just about every time I grabbed back then, which would have been the Green Guide, which was a paper guide that was like an insert in the
I remember the Green Guide, yeah.
You'd go through it and you'd see, and you'd have the whole week mapped out. So you'd go, cool, Friday night, they're going to have a double bill of, this and that, maybe Dracula and Frankenstein. And then, the week after it'd be House of Wax and a couple of Vincent Price films. So I just kind of went through it all like, in kind of chronological order. And then when I got to video stores by the time I was a teenager, I was right into the 70s and 80s stuff by then anyway. And then the 90s and then we hit 2000. So, yeah, it was just interesting.
Well, it's an interesting progression to go through because, that's sort of rare that people do that, but it's sometimes it happens just by accident.
Yeah. It's what it's meant to
based
be.
on your own sort of, based on your own sort of, I guess, experience.
And now what I'll do as an adult, is I'll go back sometimes and find these films that I missed, like these little gems. Like, have you heard about The Man Who Laughed?
L'Homme qui rit, yes.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a very good one.
Man, I mean, he's pretty much the original Joker. Do you know what I mean? It's scary.
I saw that. Well, they were actually, I can't remember if it was Bob Kane, because there's a controversial thing about the creation of Batman, because Bob Kane didn't actually create Batman as we know.
I know this argument.
Anyway, but so I don't know if it was Bob Kane or someone else, but yeah, the person who designed Joker did base it on Conrad Veidt in L'Enquête.
And when you look at those films, they're done with so much heart and passion. They're creepy because they're kind of perfect. There's something about them that's timeless, where the craft really, is in the ballpark. Like it just fits, and it's scary because I think those actors, they really embody the actual characters. Like they go there. I mean, when you see Lon Chaney in Phantom of the Opera, that guy has gone there. Do you know what I mean? Like there weren't the effects that they have now to kind of, even out the makeup or CGI some of the effects. I mean, the guy's almost transformed and disfigured himself and his face to become this character that's frightening, because when the reveal happens, he's gone there. Yeah. He's really gone there. And that's why those films are so timeless and so enigmatic.
And he's so effective. The climactic scene where he's being chased by the townsfolk, or the city's folk, I guess, is and then he's got he's cornered, and he holds up his fist like he's going to throw a grenade or something, and they all sort of stop and go, "Oh no, what's he got?" Like in that silent kind of funny way. He throws up his fist, and then he opens his fist and there's nothing in it. And he starts laughing.
Oh, it's amazing.
That's those two moments, the reveal and the bit at the end, are just chilling.
Right next to Hunchback of Notre Dame and the original Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. These movies are they're timeless, man, and they've got a realism to them that you just don't get now. You can't. It's a completely different era and age.
Well, actually, I got a question about format, because. Like, as you probably noticed, because you're an actor as well as a director, and so you understand the format pretty well. There's in silent movies, you get the sense that actors and filmmakers knew their format very well and how to translate performances onto format. There's no sound, therefore they have to emote more, and the medium they're shooting and using boxes basically with film that spins, and so there's a lot of some of the images can be hard to see, especially back then or even now, depending on the transfer. So they still had to emote and provide a lot of contrast, both in the performance as well as the shadow scheme when they're capturing the film, so that things can stand out. So blood is obviously, they have to use black fluid in order to make blood, and, or makeup would have to be shades of grey. Yeah. Even though in the mind it should be color, so they had to compensate for that. Nowadays, with digital, and you don't have to say film, you don't even have to yell cut anymore. You can just keep rolling. It seems as though there's a huge change in acting styles. I mean, in my opinion, there's no real great actor of this generation. Joaquin Phoenix is pretty close, but he came at a time when they were still shooting film. I can't think of any great actors who have encapsulated like the digital format very well.
Yeah, you're definitely touching on something there, and I think you're right, because now, in fact, even I had a conversation with a distributor recently who said, when you shoot a film now, you just roll camera. You don't even necessarily have a script that's, to the word, to the sentence, to the dotted line. It's more, okay, here's the direction we want to go. Here's an idea. Here's a bit of dialogue. Now go for it. Improvise and let the cameras roll. And we'll just capture the essence from whatever happens, and we'll call that a scene. And it's as you were saying, it's kind of like somewhere in between that and reality TV. There's a kind of pairing. You can connect the dots, and that's very different to what you just said about a clear-cut action and cut with a precise movement and a direction.
It's as though that they're creating a moment, that a glimpse within the film world. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. They're creating something out of freestyle, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's better. But then the argument will be, oh, but it felt more real, so it must be better, right? And then my counter argument is, why did you go to see that film? Did you go for entertainment, or did you want to go because it related to your normal day-to-day life? It's such a debate.
Yeah, there was the film Zodiac by David Fincher.
Oh, well, no.
They were shot digitally, and I remember seeing like a behind-the-scenes thing of the film, and they were basically just rolling the camera over and over. I mean, they barely ever yelled cut, and it worked well with David Fincher's style, which was a lot of takes, a lot of choices in the editing room. But then again, he hasn't made a good film since. Well,
that's the thing, man. This is an amazing director that I know we both love, and some of his films are in like my top 10. But he has what Tarantino would have said. He peaked. And what that style that worked for a certain period of time. It had an end. It had a start, a middle, and an end. Yeah. So it's hard to top a blockbuster when you've made a few of them. You know what I mean? Like, I think Kubrick standing out in my mind as we speak is one of the only directors that could have such a long gap in some situations 10 years, and still produce a movie that was bigger than his last. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, well, Kubrick, if you've read like all the stuff on Kubrick, I've got like about 8 or 9 books on him. Yeah. It appears as though he actually knew what he was doing in terms of marketing, and he was like the first filmmaker to consult the advertising department in studios as to what decisions to make and stuff like. And that was exactly, and that was actually ironically in a response to 2001: A Space Odyssey, because they initially fucked up the distribution in that, and it didn't become a hit until hippies started seeing it, and so not just hippies but like a whole generation saw that at that time, and they redid the posters, and instead of talking about like a science fiction epic, they talk about this is going to change your mind. This is mind altering. They compared the experience of watching this film to being on acid, which was big at the time, and so. On the poster, it says the ultimate trip. And that's what got people's attention at the time.
Interesting.
And he did that with Clockwork Orange, and he did that with every single film, basically. But he didn't perfect it until The Shining. Because Barry Lyndon, like, how do you make that film profitable?
Yeah, Barry Lyndon... I think was seen as one of his flops, if you could even, it sounds blasphemous to say that Kubrick made a flop, but it was one of those films that kind of did go a little bit under the radar, I think. But I think also Ryan O'Neal, I think he was an actor that was kind of climbing up the ranks, but didn't, I don't know, I mean, did he reach superstardom? I'm not sure. I think he was a star, but I don't think he had
Love Story catapulted him into
absolutely
clouds.
Love Story, and that'll get us onto Robert Evans, which is another conversation you and I should have.
Oh yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, Robert Evans.
Who obviously passed last week at 89. I mean, I was just saying on social media, The Kid Stays in the Picture is probably one of the best documentaries of all time, which is based on his life story. Have you seen that one?
Yeah, it's a very interesting movie.
Yeah, loved it.
I didn't know that it was like all the narration was actually taken from his audio book.
But I think what's happened is he'd had a stroke or something, because he didn't want to show his face much on camera, and the few shots you can see of him in later interviews, he's got a side profile. Yeah. He was very hung up about his looks.
Fair enough. He spent a fortune on them.
Oh, absolutely.
Did you know?
So I think, that's why most of the last doco that he did obviously was narrated.
Have you read the book?
I haven't, man.
You should read that, because he leaves a lot of fucking details out. Like he makes himself look so good in that documentary. And
I think it's my friend Martin Simpson, I think, messaged about that, director from Queensland. He was saying that the book was amazing.
Yeah, the book's pretty damn good. And he talks about in the book, he talks about getting into a fight with Mickey Rourke.
Oh, that's brilliant.
He talks about the amount of cocaine that he used to feed the cast and crew on Popeye.
Oh my God.
But my favorite bit isn't really a big story or anything in the book, but it turned like he tracked down Alan Delon's plastic surgeon.
Oh yeah.
And so I just thought that was funny. In order to, keep his good looks, he just had to use Alan Delon's plastic surgeon. I thought that was funny. Because Alan Delon is one of the most handsome men in the world. You're like, he uses a plastic surgeon? He's French. And what?
It's very interesting thinking about that, because I'm wondering, is it safer when it's all said and done to do, your autobio or your bio in film, or to write it as a novel? Because it sounds like the novel's just kind of, gloves are off.
Yeah.
And then the movie is, a little bit watered down or edited, perhaps.
Well, it's the same reason why you break up with people in a text as opposed to, in person or over the phone or something, because it's just too hard to deal with them. So you write whatever the fuck you want. And
yeah, that's true, actually.
It usually helps.
Yeah. I'm actually writing my second ebook at the moment.
Oh, cool. Great. Well, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I won't reveal what it is yet, but I'm about halfway.
Well, if you do, please reveal it here first. But yeah, well, let's get on. So
should we get onto it?
Yeah. Let's get on to your film, The Down Under.
The Down Under series, man. The Down Under franchise.
Oh, franchise. Yeah. So how many films is it planning to be? It's so far 2: Sex Down Under and Aliens Down Under. Right.
Well, there is a third. And there may be a fourth, but at the moment, so 1 and 2 are out of the bag, which is what I wanted to talk about first.
Well, let's talk about, I guess, how you came up with the series.
Yeah, great question. So, ironically, this is a kind of a scenario where a conversation with a distributor turned into roses. And what happened was, we were talking about content, because I've been in the process of re-releasing all my catalogue, which incidentally is coming out over the next 12 months. Everything I've ever made is either coming out or getting re-released, which is a big deal for me. And kind of a I wouldn't say a finish, but it's definitely kind of a bookend of sorts.
Sure.
A chapter, a decade. Anyway, so I had this little doco, Sex Around the World, that hadn't really been given a voice. It definitely hadn't had international distro. It had been shopped around, but and then shelved.
Sure.
And I was talking to one distro who said, "Oh, do you still have the rights?" And I said, "As a matter of fact, I do." Mm-hmm. And then he said, "Well, what was that episode called?" Because the series was called Sex Around the World, but this particular episode was Sex Down Under. And that kind of rang bells. And so we expanded on that. And he said, "Well, I'd like to release that as a single title." I said, "Absolutely, go for it." Mm. And then he said, Down Under, Down Under. And we sort of got stuck on this Down Under. And I decided, I might do another one in a series, because that's what I'm like. I don't normally do things just once. I like to give any idea attention, and I like to explore ideas and see where they go and all that sort of stuff. So I thought, okay, well, I'll do another one. And I just said to him, what's popular in your catalogue at the moment, and what do you think audience wants to see, particularly in the States? And he said in that moment, he said, Aliens.
Oh.
And I thought, well, for me, the Alien doco thing was more as a kid, as a teenager, being fascinated with all that sort of stuff. But I've kind of let it go as I've become an adult. But then, there still are people very passionate about it. And I thought, well, it is a topic I've always wanted to explore. So, I put out an ad and I said, has anyone that's had an encounter or, seen a UFO, would like to go on record, come and talk to me. And so I ended up assembling, after a big interview process and trying to find people that I thought were being serious, I fine-tuned it down to about 8 eyewitnesses, two people of which I already knew, which was quite surprising, which I'll talk about in a minute, and then assembled this documentary. And before you knew it, I had Sex Down Under, and then I had Aliens Down Under. And they're both now on Amazon Prime, and they've also hit DVD. So that was amazing. I didn't expect that. as far as the cast goes, actually Natalie Heslop put her hand up. You know, Natalie from Eye Portrait.
Yeah, of course.
And she had a story when she was young, when she was a teenager, and it was pretty epic. I couldn't say she was lying. Like, I had to believe her when we went through the whole story. I thought, yep, she's definitely had an experience. I think she tried to sort of black it out, though. I think her brain sort of shut down, and you know, that's what happens. You know, when sometimes people have these, you know, extraordinary kind of experiences. You know, your brain kind of shuts down over a period of time. You kind of talk yourself out of it. But you know, this is up to interpretation. I mean, because I've made Aliens Down Under, I'm not all of a sudden saying, I'm pro-alien and I'm an advocate of, you know, UFO sightings and whatnot. I mean, this is still, you know, it's still entertainment, and it's a documentary, and it's really up to the audience to interpret the answer for themselves. The other guy that put his hand up was Elgis, who's actually an actor in Cult Girls, and I think he was 60 years old, 60 plus. And he tells a fascinating story about a UFO sighting he had many years ago, but it was very similar to a story that my stepfather told me once about an object that was seen out, I think it was near the Christmas Hills on this one particular night. And when he rang through to the hotline to say, you know, he'd had a sighting, they said that there was, you know, 100 calls had just come through for the same thing. So yeah, you kind of, you know, you do wonder sometimes, and we're not really, you know, the documentary is not really talking about aliens as such. It's more about UFOs. You know, aliens is the brand, but the topic of conversation is about unidentified flying objects.
Okay, yeah.
You know, and I guess, yeah, that is up to interpretation. But the scary thing, Seb, about doing this doco for me was that all of these people that I interviewed, none of them had ever met, yet they all seemed to share a similar encounter.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting.
So the craft that they all saw was somewhat similar, and the way it presented itself, there were many similarities in what they all saw. That kind of, you know, by the end of the day after I'd interviewed these people, I really was a little bit on edge. I was a little bit confused because, you know, when you go into a documentary, you have to go in neutral or even somewhat skeptic. But after I'd heard all the accounts and found that there was some similarities, I kind of was a little bit unsettled.
Okay, interesting.
Very interesting. You know, and this is coming from someone who, you know, I mean, I've seen all the alien films. I know what's a hoax. I know what's real. I know what's not.
Sure.
I can tell when someone's lying. I know when someone's acting. You know, I can read body language. But this was interesting. You know, there was something that they'd all seen that they could only really talk about from their perspective. And you could see that what had happened with these people, they were somewhat changed. You know, like after they'd had that experience, they were somewhat changed.
Sure.
And there was something about them that was a little bit different to just a normal everyday conversation with a normal person. Or I shouldn't say normal, but, you know, an everyday person that hasn't had an experience like that.
Yeah, I get you.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to, like, so you do talk about the actual encounters that they have in the documentary. I mean, what sort of prompted the structure of the documentary? What type of documentary? Is there a narration to it, or is it talking heads?
No, there's an American narrator because it had to all be in sync with my distributor's demands, because they've got their own brand as well, and they have a series of documentaries that, you know, are on cable TV in the States and get physical media as well. So there was some rules and guidelines to adhere to, you know, under the documentary kind of umbrella. And then I just kind of ran with it from there. But I was under some pretty strict guidelines, and it was a good experience for me to, you know, collaborate with some pretty powerful American distributors, you know, that in the blink of an eye can get, you know, all of my stuff out into, you know, most online stores and any sort of digital download. It was pretty exciting in that regard.
Well, that's great. And Sex Down Under, does that have a similar structure?
It does. I mean, it was probably just kind of fine-tuned from what the original master was, which had been shot before, as we were saying. But the thing that blew me away about their interpretation was the trailer. I mean, the trailer was so good that I was smiling ear to ear. It was how I imagined it, but I wasn't physically able to do it myself. And what's happened with a couple of distros, this one in particular, for me over the last sort of 12 months as a filmmaker, is I've seen renditions of my stuff done in America, and it's kind of like how I always envisioned it, which says a lot about me as a filmmaker, because it just goes to show that, the heart of my work really is in the States. It's not Australia.
Sure, yeah.
And this keeps happening. And when it happens to that extent, you can't really ignore it. It's kind of factual now. It's not even hearsay. It's kind of real.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. Well,
so that's exciting, because I've always known that, and now I'm kind of seeing it in front of me, and I'm going, shit, I was right. I knew it. I knew it all along. It's amazing.
Sure, yeah. And for Sex Down Under, did you? I guess what was the impetus behind that? What brought you to that?
That was really a concept that myself and my colleague Nick Levy had discussed we wanted to do, because, we'd made that mockumentary, How to Be a Sex Star, which has been retitled, as you know, repackaged, called Confessions of a Lady Killer, which you and I have also done a pod on. Mm-hmm. Once we did that, we decided we wanted to kind of take it a little bit more serious, because that was more of a mockumentary, and we're both pretty serious filmmakers. So we decided to sort of, stop the tongue in cheek for a bit and actually tackle it head on. So when we decided to do the documentary, that's where that came about, and it was supposed to be, a series where we would go all around the world. Very strangely, though, very soon after that, there were a couple of series that popped up from around the world. I think there was a guy in France that had pretty much done the exact same thing. And so we sort of lost a little bit of motivation. And then Nick kind of phased out of filmmaking, and so I didn't pick it up because he was the co-producer. Mm-hmm. But now that I've got the power to, talk to other producers and executive producers, I've been able to, salvage that project, which is now in turn turned into a whole chain of stuff for me now. So isn't that amazing?
Yeah, that's great news.
And it goes hand in hand with all I was saying about the re-release stuff.
Yeah. So what is Sex Down Under about?
It explores the sexual culture in Melbourne. I mean, I'll read the synopsis if you like.
Oh, please do, yeah.
So sex is part of our lives, bodies and minds. Our very existence depends on it, yet it's treated and practiced differently in every society. Join our host as he embarks on a tour down under to uncover the sexual traditions and practices of people in Australia. He'll encounter the extraordinary, the tragic, the unseen, and the taboo in this fascinating must-see documentary. Also features Maxine Fensom, the Queen of Pussy, and Fiona Patton, the leader of the Australian Sex Party.
I have to say, it's like, oh, this is, it's like, it's so strange. How do I put this in words? I live in Australia. What is it? It's not an alien culture. It's like you make it sound like it's going to be like, I mean, obviously you're advertising, I guess, to Americans and stuff like that. Whoa, I wonder what people down under do down under.
Yeah,
if you know
yeah, that's right.
It's like, well, really? It's just probably what they do.
Well, the thing is, too, it's being picked up by an American distro. So,
I mean, I could be wrong because you're the one who did the documentary.
Definitely their opinion of us and our country is different to what ours is. And, to be the same works both ways, know. When you're packaging product and you're trying to sell it and your buyers are local Americans, there's got to be a hook, So the fact that I'm an Australian filmmaker, interviewing Australians from this land down under, it kind of fits the bill. If I had have said, join Nathan Hill in a doco about sex, it's not the same pitch. Do you know what I mean? So it's got to, and particularly in documentaries, it's really got to strike a chord, and you've got to be able to sell it.
Sure, yeah.
That's the whole thing. Would you like me to read the synopsis from the Aliens Down Under?
Oh, please do, yeah.
Okay. So, Australia is the new hotbed for weird phenomena and UFO encounters. In this documentary, we speak to 8 people with eyewitness accounts of UFO sightings in Australia, the land down under. We ask their opinions on alien abduction and their experiences on the subject. None of the people that were interviewed have ever met, yet they all seem to claim similar encounters, which will shock you to the core. Is Australia next on the map to be infected by the alien plague? Watch this documentary to find out all you need to prepare yourself for. Aliens down under. So as you can hear, that is a lot more Americanized.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's I don't know. It's fear mongering. It's it's like, oh, you got to be scared of it. I don't know. I don't believe little green men or anything like that. But it'd be interesting to see people's opinions on it. Certainly.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's still, there's a big, there's a lot of people that are hardcore fans. There are people today that are still obsessed with the topic, and there are, new generations of kids that are only now discovering it. So it's one of those topics and genres that just won't go away until, there is an alien that we can all see that lands on soil, until it's like right in your face. It's always going to be a mystery, but not just a mystery, but a topic where there has been some evidence to suggest that these things exist.
Sure.
And as I keep saying to people when I'm making these docos, to assume that they don't exist is naive, because even just the name alien or UFO comes from somewhere. Something happened and someone saw something to even determine that there was a name for it. So you can't be naive. We couldn't be naive and just say that we're the only humans on the planet, or whatever, however you want to pitch it. I mean, that's just ridiculous. How can we be? How can we be the only planet in a solar system? It's one of those arguments, isn't it? You could go on forever.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's one of those. But, again, it's genre. You only watch it if you're interested in it. I'm certainly not out there waving a flag going, you must see aliens down under. They are upon us. I'm not forcing it down people's throats. It's for the ones who want to see it, No,
that sounds great. And, well, I guess, so what do you have planned for the future or near future, I guess?
For the next one? Well, the next one, I don't want to say too much because it's it's not out.
Sure,
but it's definitely in the works. But I'll just tease you and let you know that it's about the Yowie.
Oh, okay, the chocolate things.
No, not the chocolates.
Okay.
It's about the Australian Bigfoot.
Oh, okay, yeah, I've heard of that.
So the Bigfoot in Australia, the other name for it is Yowie, and the first Australian Yowie sighting is said to have taken place as early as the year 1795. So once you go down that rabbit's hole, you'll also find a whole phenomena of stuff and information that is absolutely, gobsmacking.
Interesting.
And that's something else that we're tackling now. Someone suggested to me recently, or even asked, are you going to do drop bears? Like, once you start sort of going down this path of, creatures and characters and myths, it's a whole world opens up that you once didn't maybe know was there. You know?
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Well, that sounds really interesting. Making one on drop bears, I have to say, because I mean, obviously they're not real. They're sort of made up by a Bundaberg ad or something like that.
That's the thing. See, there are these sort of mythical creatures and these Australian sort of outback myths, and sometimes people believe existed. Like you've got the bunyip. You've got some really scary kind of creatures that are believed to have existed at some point in the country. And an American's point of view is that Australia is kind of like this scary place at times, like apart from the main cities. Like once you venture out, you've got to really watch yourself because, of the wildlife and the insects and the creatures that do exist. You're in some real rough terrain where you can get killed. You know?
We were just attacked by one, just like literally on the podcast. I had a possum come into the.
Well, there you go. You got bloody possum running, wild possum trying to break into your bedroom whilst you're on a pod. I mean, it's ridiculous. You know, and I had another experience recently with a bloody giant spider. You know, and you know, you see it on the news. Someone else has just been attacked by a shark, and then this and that, and and it just goes on and on and on. You know, it's crazy.
How big was the spider that you encountered?
Quite large, probably almost as big as my hand.
Jeez, do you know what type it was?
I think it was a type of huntsman. I don't know exactly what sort because there's quite a few different huntsmans.
Sure.
But you know that's what I think it was anyway. But enough to scare the shit out of you when you're driving.
Yeah. Oh yeah, especially if you're driving. You know, that's sort of deadly when you're like the. I guess the most deadly thing about a spider is if it's in the car and it drops onto you. You know.
The worst one I heard was from one of my good friends, and it was his sister. They were down at a beach house, and they only went down there on weekends or maybe once a month. So this kind of shack was kind of left to nature and all of its elements when they weren't there.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was an old kind of weatherboard shack. And so there were a lot of spiders I'd heard that would, you know, be in the walls and stuff. And they kind of went down in a hurry and arrived, and his sister needed a drink. And so she, without sort of thinking, just grabbed a cup out of the cupboard and they filled it up with milk. And then as she went to drink this beverage, a spider kind of came out of the cup.
Oh, no.
And kind of attacked her. You know, it jumped at her as she had her mouth half open, and it jumped at her. You know,
yeah.
Mouth.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and these spiders.
Well, you just got to kill yourself then, you know.
You intimidate them, and the claws come out, and they actually attack. One of the spiders down there had even jumped off a table and kind of apparently had wanted to attack someone. It's full on.
Yeah, it's the same with guinea pigs. They'll attack if you.
Unreal, Seb. So yeah, man. So we're looking at 1-2 Punch, and I've got a third one in the works, and you know, possibly a fourth. So I'll keep you posted. But the Down Under series, it's been interesting. It was very unpredictable and something that came out of the blue, and it's been kind of like a nice accident, you know. And it's been good to do something that's still, you know, in the film world, but you know, it's not my next big feature film, but it's still interesting, and it's still within the realm of the moving image. So, and even with Aliens, I was able to get my hands on some really rare stock footage from the States, from my distributor, that I would not have had access to. So I've now kind of got a library of all this stuff that some of it is pretty creepy, I'll be honest. It's stuff I've never seen before on UFOs.
Well, that sounds really cool. I'm definitely in.
Yeah, and the stock footage is amazing. So even with the Yowie stuff as well, I've got stock footage on that, and some of that's really creepy as well. You know, you don't know if it's real or not. Sometimes you can't tell. So when you sort of do get into this, as we were saying before, go down that rabbit's hole, you can go down as far as you want to go. You know, there's material there. If you want to study it, it's accessible. But I guess having, you know, been on the inside and being tight with the distro in the States and getting all of that is really a privilege, and I otherwise wouldn't have known about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and that's the payoff.
And, well, I guess, so before we go, have you seen anything interesting recently?
You mean movie-wise?
Yeah, movie-wise.
Trying to think. No, I think much like our last combo, I've been kind of rewatching a lot of the classics, catching up on stuff. I haven't sort of seen any new film recently that jumped out at me. Otherwise, I would have said it. It's just not off the top of my head. No.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that sounds
really. I think I'm really. Well, actually, you know, if we're going to go down that path, if we start talking about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, we'll be here all night. That was the last film I kind of, you know, made an effort to really go and see. But I'm looking forward to the new Bond, and I'm looking forward to Top Gun 2, and I'm not sure about the Star Wars. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's I've sort of fallen off the Star Wars rating. Although I did see a documentary on the making of Star Wars Episode 1. Oh, it's fucking hilarious. George Lucas, he just has no idea what he's doing. He doesn't give a shit. He just will this make a good toy? Yeah, good.
Yeah, it's crazy. I've got the book and I've got that doco as well. It's full on.
Yeah, it's worth seeing the doco. It's like up there with.
What was your score on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? Were you all for it or against or neutral?
Yeah, it's just typical boring Tarantino wankfest. Like I didn't hate it. It just didn't inspire anything in me.
No,
it's like Reservoir Dogs and
I was
Pulp Fiction.
heartbroken by that.
Yeah, well, that's a pity. It's a pity.
I went out and I actually saw. Actually, I can answer your question properly.
Mm-hmm.
In a reaction to that, I went out and I bought a copy of the other Sharon Tate movie. Hang on. Okay, it was called The Haunting of Sharon Tate.
Oh, with Lizzie McGuire.
I think it's Hilary Duff.
Yeah, Hilary. So she played a girl named Lizzie McGuire on like a TV show in the.
That's right. And I hate to say this, but as far as that genre is concerned, that film was probably even a little bit more entertaining. And that film's been canned. I mean, that's got like a 2 or 3 out of 10 on IMDb. It's been absolutely destroyed. And I kind of, being a sort of Manson gang historian myself, I've seen every movie on the subject. The best one I ever saw would have been, I think, 1979, 1980, The Helter Skelter. That's the best version ever made.
Yeah, with Steve Railsback as.
Oh man, he was so convincing.
He was born to play that part. It ruined his life.
It was him. When I saw that as a young guy, I was like, how the hell did they get Manson out of jail to play this role?
It ruined his career because every time he'd go for an audition, everyone saw Charles Manson. They're like,
100%. He was frighteningly so much like the guy. He embodied the guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd seen every movie. So when I saw Once Upon a Time, I was absolutely dying to see the end scene. I was wanting to see how they'd constructed it, how Tarantino's take was going to be on the actual Manson killings. Now, I know that sounds horrible, but that's what all the movies are about. And I wanted to see if they could actually nail that as a craft, as a filmmaker. And when they when they put a spin on it and decided to keep her alive and do their own killing next door, I was really let down. I just thought, nah, man, I didn't come here to see this. It's not actually funny. It's kind of shit.
Yeah. Another director of that film, The Haunting of Sharon Tate. I haven't seen The Haunting of Sharon Tate, but he's been doing recently a series of not reenactments, but sort of like dramatizations of what happened to like famous murders. He did one on the Amityville murders, and I think he's going to be doing one on Nicole Brown Simpson, O.J. Simpson's wife at the time.
And the other thing is, because you know how much I love Bruce Lee, so I had actually in fact talked to Shannon Lee online. That's really? Bruce Lee's daughter, and she was livid about how the interpretation that they'd made on Bruce in the movie, and they detested it.
Interesting.
And when I saw the press conference at Cannes, someone asked Tarantino if he had met Polanski, and he kind of went, "Oh yeah, I've seen him a couple of times," and that was it. But there was certainly no permission. There wasn't like really any, connection or thought process or a reach out to Polanski or to the Bruce Lee family at all. It was just his interpretation, and. I don't know, man. It's just kind of it just didn't do it for me. I think he peaked at Django. That was it.
I think he peaked at Reservoir Dogs. That's that's the most intense film that he's made. Everything is like just like everyone's like on morphine or something. They're just like.
But this is like so many of these filmmakers where when they're desperate and hungry and on the edge and trying to make a name for himself, and they pour all their blood, sweat, and tears into a film. It's always better than the movie that follows, where they're sitting back in the chair with the coffees on tap and the assistants and all the money. Everyone knows that. The money and the process of the studio almost makes them a bit more lazy because they're not as hungry, and you see that happen a lot. Unless someone who's, I guess already in the system, they're already in the studio system and they're already grown up around money and they know how to manage it and actually make big scale films. Like I'm just thinking James Cameron, he comes to mind, or Michael Mann, men that really understand, the size and scale of filmmaking, then it's different.
I know that just an interesting bit of trivia about The Haunting of Sharon Tate. Abigail Folger is played by Lydia Hearst, who's Patty Hearst's daughter. Now, Abigail Folger was famously the heir of the Folgers coffee.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, I just thought that was interesting. Anyway, let's wrap this up. Thank you very much for coming on tonight.
Buddy, thanks for having me back. It's been great. It's been a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll have to talk about you'll have to come on for your next one as well, or just whenever you want.
I'll tell you all about it. I've got a couple in the works, so it'd be good to talk about the other one next time. That'd be great.
Well, that's great. You're always working. It's good to hear that.
This podcast was produced, edited, and mixed by Sebastian Mittelman. My collaborators for the series are Russ Nichols, David Cornell, and Murray Starr.